The earliest known world maps date to classical antiquity. The oldest examples of the 6th to 5th centuries BC still based on the flat Earth paradigm. World maps assuming a spherical Earth first appear in the Hellenistic period. The developments of Greek geography during this time, notably by Eratosthenes and Posidonius, culminated in the Roman era with Ptolemy's world map, which would remain authoritative throughout the Middle Ages. Since Ptolemy, knowledge of the approximate size of the globe allowed cartographers to estimate the extent of the geographical knowledge, and to indicate parts of the globe known to exist but not yet explored as terra incognita. With the Age of Discovery, during the 15th to 18th centuries, world maps became increasingly accurate. Exploration of Antarctica and the interior of Africa was left to the 19th and early 20th century. Antiquity. Babylonian Imago Mundi. A Babylonian world map, known as the Imago Mundi, is commonly dated to the 6th century BCE. The map is reconstructed by Echard shows Babylon on the Euphrates, surrounded by a circular land mass showing Assyria, Urartu and several cities, in turn surrounded by a bitter river, with 7 islands arranged around it so as to form a 7-pointed star. The accompanying text mentions 7 outer regions beyond the encircling ocean. The descriptions of 5 of them have survived. The 3rd island is where the winged bird ends not his flight, i.e. cannot reach. On the 4th island, the light is brighter than that of sunset as stars. It lay in the northwest, and after sunset in summer was practically in semi-obscurity. The 5th island, due north, lay in complete darkness, a land where one sees nothing, and the sun is not visible. The 6th island, where a horned bull dwells and attacks the newcomer. The 7th island lay in the east and is where the morning dawns. Anaximander is credited with having created one of the first maps of the world, which was circular in form and showed the known lands of the world grouped around the Aegean Sea at the center. This was all surrounded by the ocean. Hecataeus of Miletus. Hecataeus of Miletus is credited with a work entitled Ges period.The, in 2 books, each organized in the manner of a periplus, a point-to-point coastal survey. One on Europe is essentially a periplus of the Mediterranean, describing each region in turn, reaching as far north as Scythia. The other book, on Asia, is arranged similarly to the periplus of the Erythraean Sea, of which a version of the 1st century CE survives. Hecataeus described the countries and inhabitants of the known world, the account of Egypt being particularly comprehensive. The descriptive matter was accompanied by a map based upon Anaximander's map of the Earth, which he corrected and enlarged. The work only survives in some 374 fragments, by far the majority being quoted in the geographical lexicon Ethnica compiled by Stephanus of Byzantium. Eratosthenes drew an improved world map incorporating information from the campaigns of Alexander the Great and his successors. Asia became wider, reflecting the new understanding of the actual size of the continent. Eratosthenes was also the first geographer to incorporate parallels and meridians within his cartographic depictions, attesting to his understanding of the spherical nature of the Earth. Posidonius of Apamea was a Greek Stoic philosopher who traveled throughout the Roman world and beyond, and was a celebrated polymath throughout the Greco-Roman world. Like Aristotle and Eratosthenes, his work about the ocean and the adjacent areas was a general geographical discussion, showing how all the forces had an effect on each other and applied also to human life. sky. He measured the Earth's circumference by reference to the position of the star Canopus. His measure of 240,000 stadia translates to 24,000 miles, close to the actual circumference of 24,901 miles. He was informed in his approach by Eratosthenes, who a century earlier used the elevation of the Sun at different latitudes. Both men's figures for the Earth's circumference were uncannily accurate, aided in each case by mutually compensating errors in measurement. However, the version of Posidonius's calculation popularized by Strabo was revised by correcting the distance between Rhodes and Alexandria to 3,750 stadia, resulting in a circumference of 180,000 stadia, or 18,000 miles. Ptolemy discussed and favored this revised figure of Posidonius over Eratosthenes in his Geographia, and during the Middle Ages scholars divided into two camps regarding the circumference of the Earth, one side identifying with Eratosthenes' calculation and the other with Posidonius's 180,000 stadion measure. Strabo is mostly famous for his 17-volume work Geographica, which presented a descriptive history of people and places from different regions of the world known to his era. The Geographica first appeared in Western Europe in Rome as a Latin translation issued around 1469. Although Strabo referenced the antique Greek astronomers Eratosthenes and Hipparchus and acknowledged their astronomical and mathematical efforts towards geography, he claimed that a descriptive approach was more practical. Geographica provides a valuable source of information on the ancient world, especially when this information is corroborated by other sources. Within the books of Geographica is a map of Europe. Whole world maps according to Strabo are reconstructions from his written text. Pomponius Mela Pomponius is unique among ancient geographers in that, after dividing the Earth into 5 zones, of which 2 only were habitable, he asserts the existence of antizones, people inhabiting the southern temperate zone inaccessible to the folk of the northern temperate regions due to the unbearable heat of the intervening torrid belt. On the divisions and boundaries of Europe, Asia and Africa, he repeats Eratosthenes. Like all classical geographers from Alexander the Great, he regards the Caspian Sea as an inlet of the Northern Ocean, corresponding to the Persian and Arabian Gulfs on the south. Marinus of Tyre's world maps were the first in the Roman Empire to show China. Around 120 CE, Marinus wrote that the habitable world was bounded on the west by the Fortunate Islands. The text of his geographical treatise, however, is lost. He also invented the equirectangular projection, which is still used in map creation today. A few of Marinus's opinions are reported by Ptolemy. Marinus was of the opinion that the Okeanos was separated into an eastern and a western part by the continents. He thought that the inhabited world stretched in latitude from Thule to Aguasimbra and in longitude from the Isles of the Blessed to Shira. Marinus also coined the term Antarctic, referring to the opposite of the Arctic Circle. His chief legacy is that he first assigned to each place a proper latitude and longitude. He used a meridian of the Isles of the Blessed as the zero meridian. Ptolemy's surviving texts of Ptolemy's Geography, first composed c. 150, note that he continued the use of Marinus's equirectangular projection for its regional maps while finding it inappropriate for maps of the entire known world. Instead, in Book 7 of his work, he outlines 3 separate projections of increasing difficulty and fidelity. Ptolemy followed Marinus in underestimating the circumference of the world, combined with accurate absolute distances. This led him to also overestimate the length of the Mediterranean Sea in terms of degrees. His prime meridian at the Fortunate Isles was therefore around 10 actual degrees further west of of Alexandria than intended, a mistake that was corrected by Al-Khwarizmi following the translation of Syriac editions of Ptolemy into Arabic in the 9th century. The oldest surviving manuscripts of the work date to Maximus Planudes' restoration of the text a little before 1300 at Kora Monastery in Constantinople. Surviving manuscripts from this era seem to preserve separate recensions of the text which diverged as early as the 2nd or 4th century. A passage in some of the recensions credits an Agathadaimon with drafting a world map, but no maps seem to have survived to be used by Planudes monks. Instead, he commissioned new world maps calculated from Ptolemy's thousands of coordinates and drafted according to the text's first and second projections, along with the equirectangular regional maps. A copy was translated into Latin by Jacobus Angelus at Florence around 1406 and soon supplemented with maps on the first projection. Maps using the second projection were not made in Western Europe until Nicolaus Germanus's 1466 edition. Ptolemy's third projection does not seem to have been used at all before new discoveries expanded the known world beyond the point where it provided a useful format. Cicero's dream of Scipio described the Earth as a globe of insignificant size in comparison to the remainder of the cosmos. Many medieval manuscripts of Macrobius's commentary on the dream of Scipio include maps of the Earth, including the Antipodes, zonal maps showing the Ptolemaic climates derived from the concept of a spherical Earth, and a diagram showing the Earth at the center of the hierarchically ordered planetary sphere. Tabula Peutingeriana. The Tabula Peutingeriana is an itinerarium showing the cursus publicus, the road network in the Roman Empire. It is a 13th century copy of an original map dating from the 4th century, covering Europe, parts of Asia and North Africa. The map is named after Conrad Peutinger, a German 15th–16th century humanist and antiquarian. The map was discovered in a library in Worms by Conrad Celtes, who was unable to publish his find before his death, and bequeathed the map in 1508 to Peutinger. It is conserved at the Österreichische National Bibliothek Hofburg, Vienna. Middle Ages. Cosmas Indicopalists map. Around 550 Cosmas Indicopalists wrote the copiously illustrated Christian topography, a work partly based on his personal experiences as a merchant on the Red Sea and Indian Ocean in the early 6th century. Though his cosmogony is refuted by modern science, he has given a historic description of India and Sri Lanka during the 6th century, which is invaluable to historians. Cosmas seems to have personally visited the kingdom of Axum in modern Ethiopia and Eritrea, as well as India and Sri Lanka. In 522 CE, he visited the Malabar coast. A major feature of his topography is Cosmas' worldview that the world is flat, and that the heavens form the shape of a box with a curved lid, a view he took from unconventional interpretations of Christian scripture. Cosmas aimed to prove that pre-Christian geographers had been wrong in asserting that the Earth was spherical and that it was in fact modeled on the tabernacle, the house of worship described to Moses by God during the Jewish exodus from Egypt. Isidore of Seville map. The medieval TNO maps originate with the description of the world in the Etymologia of Isidore of Seville. This qualitative and conceptual type of medieval cartography represents only the top half of a spherical Earth. It was presumably tacitly considered a convenient projection of the inhabited portion of the world known in Roman and medieval times. The T is the Mediterranean, dividing the three continents, Asia, Europe and Africa, and the O is the surrounding ocean. Jerusalem was generally represented in the center of the map. Asia was typically the size of the other two continents combined. Because the sun rose in the east, Paradise was generally depicted as being in Asia, and Asia was situated at the top portion of the map. Ibn Hawqal's map. Ibn Hawqal was an Arab scientist of the 10th century who developed a world map based on his own travel experience and probably the works of Ptolemy. Another such cartographer was Daiquiri. Anglo-Saxon Cotton World Map. This map appears in a copy of a classical work on geography, the Latin version by Priscian of the period Jesus, that was among the manuscripts in the Cotton Library, now in the British Library. It is not intended purely as an illustration to that work, for it contains much material gathered from other sources, including some which would have been the most up-to-date available, although it is based on a distant Roman original on which the network of lines appears to indicate the boundaries of imperial provinces. The date of drawing was formally estimated at about CE 992 to 994, based on suggested links to the journey of Archbishop Sigeric of Canterbury from Rome, but more recent analysis indicates that, although the information was revised about that time, the map was probably drawn between 1025 and 1050. Like the later map by Al-Idrisi, this map is clearly outside the largely symbolic early medieval mapping tradition, but equally it is not based on the famous Ptolemaic coordinate system. East is at the top, but Jerusalem is not in the center, and the Garden of Eden is nowhere to be seen. Unusually, all the waterways of Africa, not just the Red Sea, are depicted in red. The depiction of the Far East is ambitious, including India and Taprobane, the latter depicted according to the exaggerated classical conception of its size. Unsurprisingly, Britain itself is depicted in some detail. Great Britain, unusually by medieval standards, is shown as one island, albeit with an exaggerated Cornish promontory. Amona, Ireland and the many Scottish islands are all indicated. The cartographer is slightly confused by Iceland, depicting it both by a version of its classical name, Thule, northwest of Britain, and as island, logically linked with Scandinavia. Beatus Mappa Mundi. Beatus of Liébana was an Asturian monk and theologian. He corresponded with Alcuin, and took part in the adoptionist controversy, criticizing the views of Felix of Urgel and Elipandus of Toledo. He is best remembered today as the author of his commentary on the Apocalypse, published in 776. An illustrated manuscript known as the Sanseva Beatus, featuring the commentary, was produced around 1050 at the Abbey of Saint-Sever, Aquitaine, France. It contains one of the oldest Christian world maps as an illustration of the commentary. Although the original manuscript and map has not survived, copies of the map survives in several of the extant manuscripts. Mahmud al-Kashgari's map. Karakana de Gurskola. Mahmud al-Kashgari compiled a compendium of the languages of the Turks in the 11th century. The manuscript is illustrated with a Turco-centric world map oriented with east on top, centered on the ancient city of Balasagun in what is now Kyrgyzstan, showing the Caspian Sea to the north, and Iraq, Armenia, Yemen and Egypt to the west, China and Japan to the east, Hindustan, Kashmir, Gog and Magog to the south. Conventional symbols are used throughout: blue lines for rivers, red lines for mountain ranges, etc. The world is shown as encircled by the ocean. The map is now kept at the Pera Museum in Istanbul. Al-Idrisi's Tabula Rogeria and the Arab geographer Muhammad al-Idrisi incorporated the knowledge of Africa, the Indian Ocean and the Far East gathered by Arab merchants and explorers with the information inherited from the classical geographers to create the most accurate map of the world at the time. It remained the most accurate world map for the next 3 centuries. The Tabula Rogeriana was drawn by Alitrisi in 1154 for the Norman king Roger II of Sicily after a stay of 18 years at his court, where he worked on the commentaries and illustrations of the map. The map, written in Arabic, shows the Eurasian continent in its entirety, but only shows the northern part of the African continent. Ebstorf Mappa Mundi. The Ebstorf map was an example of a European Mappa Mundi, made by Gervase of Ebstorf, who was possibly the same man as Gervase of Tilbury, sometime in the 13th century. It was a very large map, painted on 30 goat skins sewn together. It measured about 3.6 meters times 3.6 meters. The head of Christ was depicted at the top of the map, with his hands on either side and his feet at the bottom. The map was a greatly elaborated version of the medieval tripartite Atiano map. It was centered on Jerusalem with east on top of the map. It represented Rome in the shape of a lion, and had an evident interest in the distribution of bishoprics. The original was destroyed during World War II, but some photographs and color copies remain. Hereford Mappa Mundi. The Hereford Mappa Mundi is a detailed Mappa Mundi based on the Tiano map style, dating to c. 1300. The map is signed by one Richard of Haldingham Lavard, drawn on a single sheet of vellum. It measures 158 by 133 centimeters. The writing is in black ink, with additional red and gold, and blue or green for water. The captions demonstrate clearly the multiple functions of these large medieval maps, conveying a massive information on biblical subjects and general history, in addition to geography. Jerusalem is drawn at the center of the circle. East is on top, showing the Garden of Eden in a circle at the edge of the world. Great Britain is drawn at the northwestern border. Curiously, the labels for Africa and Europe are reversed, with Europe scribed in red and gold as Africa, and vice versa. Pietro Visconti's World Map. Italian geographer Pietro Visconti was a pioneer of the field of the Portolan chart. His nautical charts are among the earliest to map the Mediterranean and Black Sea regions accurately. He also produced progressively more accurate depictions of the coastlines of northern Europe. In his world map of 1321 he brought his experience as a maker of portolans to bear. The map introduced a previously unheard of accuracy to the Mappa Mundi genre. The world map, as well as a map of the Holy Land and plan of Vega and Jerusalem, were made for inclusion in Marino Sanuto's Liber Secretorum Fidelium Crucis. Catalan World Atlas. The Catalan World Atlas was produced by the Mallorcan Cartographic School and is attributed to Cresques Abraham. It has been in the Royal Library of France since the time of Charles V. The Catalan Atlas originally consisted of 6 vellum leaves folded down the middle, painted in various colors including gold and silver. The first 2 leaves contain texts in Catalan language covering cosmography, astronomy, and astrology. These texts are accompanied by illustrations. The text and illustration emphasize the Earth's spherical shape and the state of the known world. They also provide information to sailors on tides and how to tell time at night. Unlike many other nautical charts, the Catalan Atlas is read with the north at the bottom. As a result of this, the maps are oriented from left to right, from the Far East to the Atlantic. The first 2 leaves, forming the oriental portion of the Catalan Atlas, illustrate numerous religious references as well as a synthesis of medieval Mappi Mundi and the travel literature of the time, notably Marco Polo's Book of Marvels and the Travels and Voyage of Sir John Mandeville. Many Indian and Chinese cities can be identified. Untitled World Map. The Untitled World Map, likely made in the late 14th or the 15th century, shows China at the center and Europe halfway round the globe, depicted very small and horizontally compressed at the edge. The coast of Africa is also mapped from an Indian Ocean perspective, showing the Cape of Good Hope area. It is believed that maps of this type were made since about the 1320s, but all earlier specimens have been lost. So the earliest survivor is the elaborate, colorful Untitled, painted on 17 square meters of silk, Culminated World Map. The Culminated is a map of the world made in Korea in 1402. Created under the supervision of Korean officials as part of a cultural project of the newly founded Joseon dynasty. It is the most familiar example of the known world maps based on Chinese cartographic techniques with additional input from Western sources, via Islamic scholarship in the Mongol Empire. Superficially similar to the Untitled, the Culminated shows its Korean origin in the enlargement of the country, and incorporates vastly improved mapping of Japan. Elsewhere, the map portrays a decorative rather than practical purpose, particularly in the portrayal of river systems, which form unnatural loops rarely seen on Chinese maps. Nonetheless, it is considered as superior to anything produced in Europe prior to the end of the 15th century. The Verga World Map. The Verga World Map was made by Albertinus de Verga between 1411 and 1415. Albertine de Verga, a Venetian, is also known for a 1409 map of the Mediterranean, also made in Venice. The world map is circular, drawn on a piece of parchment 69.6 cm times 44 cm. It consists of the map itself, about 44 cm in diameter, and an extension containing a calendar and two tables. Bianco's world map. Andrea Bianco's Atlas of 1436 comprises 10 leaves of vellum, measuring 29 cm times 38 cm in an 18th century binding. The first leaf contains a description of the rule of Martellus for resolving the course with the circle and square, 2 tables and 2 other diagrams. The next 8 leaves contain various navigation charts. The 9th leaf contains a circular world map measuring 25 cm in circumference, and the final leaf contains the Ptolemaic world map on Ptolemy's first projection, with graduation. Some believe Bianco's maps were the first to correctly portray the coast of Florida, as a macro-peninsula is attached to a large island labeled Antilia. Bianco also collaborated with Fra Mauro on the Fra Mauro World Map of 1459. Genoese map. The Genoese map of 1457 is a world map that relied extensively on the account of the traveler to Asia Niccolò da Conti, rather than the usual source of Marco Polo. The author is unknown, but is a more modern development than the Fra Mauro World Map, less intricate and complete, with fairly good proportions given to each continents. The map depicts the main landmarks of the time: Prestigion in Africa, the Great Khan in China, Zilum and Sumatra, and the design of a 3-masted European ship in the Indian Ocean, something which had not occurred, suggesting that a sea run was a possibility. Fra Mauro World Map. The Fra Mauro map was made between 1457 and 1459 by the Venetian monk Fra Mauro. It is a circular planisphere drawn on parchment and set in a wooden frame, about 2 meters in diameter. The original world map was made by Fra Mauro and his assistant Andrea Bianco, a sailor cartographer, under a commission by King Afonso V of Portugal. The map was completed on April 24, 1459, and sent to Portugal, but did not survive to the present day. Fra Mauro died the next year while he was making a copy of the map from the Signory of Venice, and the copy was completed by Andrea Bianco. The map is preserved in the Museo Corra in Venice. Martellus World Map. The world map of Henricus Martellus Germanus, c. 1490, was remarkably similar to the terrestrial globe later produced by Martin Behaim in 1492, the Apfel. Both show heavy influences from Ptolemy, and both possibly derived from maps created around 1485 in Lisbon by Bartolomeo Columbus. Although Martellus is believed to have been born in Nuremberg, Behaim's hometown, he lived and worked in Florence from 1480 to 1496. Behaim's Apfel Globe. The Apfel produced by Martin Behaim in 1492 is considered to be the oldest surviving terrestrial globe. It is constructed of a laminated linen ball reinforced with wood and overlaid with a map painted by Georg Glockenden. The Americas are not included yet, as Columbus returned to Spain no sooner than March 1493. It shows a rather enlarged Eurasian continent and an empty ocean between Europe and Asia. Interestingly, the Caribbean islands may already be represented as well, even before Columbus's return, under the name of the mythical St. Brendan's Island. Japan and Asian islands are disproportionately large. The idea to call the globe apple may be related to the Reichsapfel, which was also kept in Nuremberg along with the imperial regalia. In 1907, it was transferred to the Germanic Museum in Nuremberg.